I'm going to talk about is, I think, a stimulating talk based on my experience at high altitude at our institute, thanks to my father, Professor Dr. Gustavo Subieta Castillo, the founder of our institution. He was a visionary man. He has changed in our minds what hypoxia is, what chronic hypoxia is, how diseases are seen, and my intention is to show you what my father taught us in respect to the chronic hypoxia effects on the body. We have created with my father, and later on Natalia, my daughter, has added up the Science, Honor, and Truth Medal. It's a very interesting medal because it's based on the concepts of doing science, but doing them with honor and facing the truth. So during our third symposium, I want to add that we have dedicated the third symposium to John Scott Haldane and Joseph Barcroft, because they were the great English scientists from both fantastic universities. And it was Professor Merici that was from the University of Cambridge with whom we did that meeting, the third symposium of chronic hypoxia. Please note that the name was the effect of chronic hypoxia on diseases at high altitude. And then we just changed to chronic hypoxia symposium. There's Joseph Barcroft and his famous glass chamber. He created a glass chamber and exposed himself and even exposed his own artery to make blood gas measurements. But this is our IPPA glass chamber. And you see down here, this is during the first World Congress on High Altitude Medicine, held here in La Paz in 1994. We were directing it with my father, I, and Doctor from the American Embassy, John Triplett. And we invited many people, and among them you can see here next to my father is Charlie Houston, a great American scientist. When he came to visit our institution, which was in the old building. When he walked in and saw our glass chamber, he said, "Barcroft's glass chamber." So it was unique that at high altitude we would have a glass chamber. This is our modern glass chamber. The other one is in the museum. Those that are present here will come to visit our museum. We will arrange a visit there, and that's where our old chamber is. So Joseph Barcroft, an Irishman from Cambridge University, visited the highlands in Peru. After his high altitude expedition to Cerro del Pasco at 4,300 meters, it was in a train. He set up a laboratory, very advanced for the time. And he was, of course, a great scientist. He wrote in his book, The Respiratory Function of Blood Lessons from High Altitude. The acclimatized man is not the man who has attained to bodily and mental powers as great in Cerro del Pasco as he would have in Cambridge, whether that town be situated in Massachusetts or in England. Such a man does not exist. All dwellers at high altitude are persons of impaired physical and mental powers. And that's what Professor Achinelli mentioned. And so here's Carlos Monge. Carlos Monge played an interesting role. Carlos Monge was surprised, as my father would have been, of course, immediately. The high altitude natives and Indo-Spanish people of America must be considered in the light of the deterministic forces of an oxygen deficient environment. The climatic imperatives determine and sustain an adaptive equilibrium. Ignorance of these postulates has led eminent men of science to make shocking errors of interpretation. We proved that Professor Barcroft was himself suffering from a subacute mountain sickness without realizing it. They say that, and that really upsets many of the people that supported Barcroft. But it is true. When you are acutely exposed, when we were I'm sorry, everyone from all over the world calling me all the time, I had to shut them down. When we were, I was talking that Professor Barcroft was himself suffering from acute mountain sickness. Once we went to work at the Pyramid Laboratory in Chacaltaya, 5,300 meters. And I, myself, being accustomed to 3,500, at 5,200 meters, had opened my ink pen and put it back in my pocket without the cap. So I had a beautiful spot that I still keep in my shirt. Okay, so the Andean man must be physically distinct from sea level man and requiring much further research before one may define, let alone apply the terms inferior and superior. Very important. Next. But John West wrote recently in 2015, Barcroft's bold assertion, all dwellers at high altitudes are persons with impaired physical and mental powers. So this concept still continues. That's our concern. High altitude exposure stimulates adaptive function for survival. And we know, for instance, pulmonary hypertension, right, hypertrophy, increased vascularity, increased red blood cells, but there's many other factors, and I didn't want to put it there, but I put this other one, increased mitochondrial efficiency, which was, by the way, criticized when we wrote this. But now in this talk, you will see proofs of this increased mitochondrial efficiency in this meeting by some eminent scientists from Laval University and in Switzerland. Next. Are deficiencies tolerable? You know, if a living organism such as that of a human receives less water, dehydration, you die. Less potassium, and cardiac arrest. Less sodium, neural transmission alterations, lower blood pressure. Less chloride, infections. Less food, emaciation. Less vitamin C, scurvy, like when they traveled in the old times, in the colony times, in their ships, they would have scurvy, a very serious disease, and people died. Less vitamin B, neuritis, less vitamin D, osteoporosis, less calcium, osteoporosis, less zinc, less immunity, less magnesium, decreased bone density, or nerve function, less selenium. You know, all these alterations, less glucose, hypoglycemia, dysfunction, and so on, they are all deleterious, and you cannot adapt to them. You cannot. If you lack them, if you lack water, you can't adapt to lack of water, you'll die. So, for us, chronic hypoxia exposure to less oxygen gives rise to adaptation and more survival. It's exactly the opposite. You see, the frequent use of any organ when confirmed by habit increases the function of that organ, leads to its development, and endows it with a size and power which it does not possess in animals which exercise it less. This is from Jean-Baptiste Lamarck in 1809. First person to use the term biology, by the way. So function makes the organ. That's from Jean-Baptiste. And I would like to add function under chronic hypoxia improves the organism. I hope this truly becomes a reality. I think this meeting will help us clarify this and set it as readers. So the types, we talk about genetic and physiological adaptation. We don't talk about acclimatization. My father opposed acclimatization, the term. I know everyone uses it in the great centers and so on, but this changing of oxygen concentration is not a climate change. It's not a temperature. It's not a humidity. It's not all these factors of the environment, but it is a completely different barometric pressure change. That's why we use genetic and physiological adaptation, which can give rise to all these changes that you see here and change to survive. Next, please. And by the way, physiological adaptation becomes genetic adaptation eventually. And this is our high altitude adaptation formula. It's the adaptation equals time over altitude. If you come to the city of La Paz, you have to adapt on a certain time factor, and that time factor is the increase of red blood cells, plus all the other metabolic changes. Next. So the hematocrit in plasma red blood cells at sea level, for instance, of 36, you have a low percentage of red blood cells in relation to the whole blood. And anemia, you have much less red blood cells. Now, so anyone coming with anemia to high altitude is in trouble. More complicated adaptation, let's say. So these are the oxygen porters, the red blood cells, and we love red blood cells. We don't hate them. And so we increase. For instance, when I come to La Paz, in 40 days, I recover my normal hematocrit, which was at sea level 36, it now becomes 50%. I have lived over 60 years or a little less with a 50% hematocrit, except when I was a child. But in chronic mountain sickness, you have an increase of red blood cells above those normal. But is it? That's the question, and we will address that later on. And it was termed loss of adaptation, but that is wrong. It's in La Paz, we consider it a greater than 58%, and it is a term that should not be used. My father opposed it greatly, never talk about loss of adaptation again. That's what he said. So hundreds and thousands of papers have used this erroneous terminology, loss of adaptation, and they continue to do so. So we have to stop that, because you cannot adapt. You cannot lose your adaptation. If you lose your adaptation, you die. And so my father wrote a paper, loss of adaptation does not exist. It's on the way. So when you're at sea level, you have these values of arterial blood gases and a hematocrit, for instance, of 42%. If you go up to La Paz, then this beautiful city of La Paz, where you all are right now, and if you come up really fast, anyway, Professor Acinelli, by the way, has brought these pulse oximeters. I hope you can see them. There you are, with a watch to record our saturation, as I had mentioned before. And this is recording, and he has seen that his values were exactly the same as mine, having arrived the same day. So that's what happens. The PaO2 drops to 60 because it's a pressure change. It's very important. And the carbon dioxide, by the way, goes down to 30 millimeters, and it's very important. If you come up really fast, you have acute mountain sickness, HAPE or haze. You can have it, but nobody in this institute has died from HAPE or haze during 52 years. Not one has died if you have pneumonia. However, if you come up slowly, take it easy the first few days, and if the adaptation truly, your hematocrit goes up slowly, and you achieve a remarkable adaptation to chronic hypoxia. This is this formula. That's why I remind you, is time over altitude change. Now it's different when you're going up a mountain because you're changing altitude all the time. Now these are the oxygen transport mechanisms: the pneumodynamic pump, which are the lungs and the heart, and in between, and the most important factor for chronic hypoxia are the red blood cells. There you go. And this is a recent article we published, where I show the oxygen transport triad, the pneumodynamic pump, hemodynamic pump, and hemoglobin, and how we apply all the gas laws for oxygen to arrive to the mitochondria. And you know, for instance, in this article, it says that in ischemic stroke, one of the fundamental recovery factors is the increased expression of vascular and arterial growth factor. You have to grow more vessels in your brain to survive. Well, we at high altitude grow more vessels in our brains, in our hearts, everywhere in our bodies as part of our adaptation. That's why this elevation of vascular and arterial growth factor, following even acute myocardial infarction, evidence of its origin and functional significance. You will see some of the talks from the local doctors that are scheduled on Thursday afternoon, that they will show some of this here in La Paz. What I want you to see is, and this is a beautiful graph that I prepared for one of our other publications, but you see vascular and arterial growth factor, increased nitrous oxide, increased EPO, HIF that produces molecular changes, and then increased mitochondrial efficiency. There's your hemoglobin going up gradually over time, and many other changes that I can't talk now. Please. This shows how the hematocrit increases with altitude. That's the estimated Mount Everest. Professor that came also from the Czech Republic, František Koller, has shown that in rats, if you expose them to the altitude of Everest, they achieve this hematocrit, 20 grams per meter. So this prediction is very accurate right here. It's just a trend. The carbon dioxide goes down as you increase in altitude. And you see on Mount Everest, it's around 8 millimeters of mercury. And so from that, we created the tolerance to hypoxia formula, and it's hemoglobin over carbon dioxide tension times a factor. Notice that we're talking about tolerance to hypoxia, but there is no oxygen in the formula. That's what's fascinating for high altitude medicine. The pressure of oxygen changes. That's okay, just go ahead. And so this is the wonderful city of La Paz. And here we are defeating hypoxia. Nobody worries about hypoxia in this city, except those that are in acute diseases, of course. But for instance, this for us is normoxia. This is our normal life, completely normal life. And when we go to sea level, it's hyperoxia. It's an abnormal condition for high altitude residents. And my father wrote that man can adapt to any altitude, even the summit of Mount Everest. And he said, the organic systems of human beings and all other species tend towards adaptation to any environmental change within an optimal period of time and never tend towards regression, loss of adaptation, or de-adaptation that inevitably leads to death. And we will talk a little more in the conference about extended longevity at high altitude. And you can see that this is the lowest part, the lowest departments in Bolivia at 320 meters, and it goes up to La Paz and El Potosí. And you will see that it increases the longevity. Now, the place to be is in Chuquisaca. That's where you live much longer. Good wine, I guess. Where is COVID less deadly? At sea level or in the highlands? The chronic hypoxia challenge. When it started, everyone believed that we would have many deaths in the high altitude people. It was exactly the opposite. And I affirmed that in a conference, in a radio conference in Zadiunsa in January 2020, before COVID arrived here. I said the probability is that it will be the other way. We will have lower incidence because of higher ultraviolet radiation, the physiological adaptation is wrong. And it has been proved to be so. This is a beautiful paper we wrote with Cristian Arias Reyes, fundamental role, and Jorge Solis, and you see many of people here. Natalia is here, and Edith is here also. So this paper, by the way, has so many citations now. It has been the stimulating point of many other papers to write about high altitude. For instance, this one, also Cristian Arias Reyes and the team, and showing how, as you go high, the incidence of COVID goes low. Very nice work. There'll be a talk about this, and several talks, in fact, from different places. And then again, we criticized the fact that they kept saying that at high altitude you would have higher incidence of COVID or equal. And these are graphs that show the same thing. We published that there also. Our recent study, we studied 161 million people from all these countries. It confirmed totally our observations. This is part of the, if you see the first line is lower than 1,000 meters and higher than 1,000 meters. Look, always there's less at high altitude in all countries. And this is a nice paper with West that we wrote. So in intensive care, those that had a higher EPO survived more than those that had lower EPO. Those that had higher hematocrit survived much better than those with lower hematocrit. Beautiful work, okay. The conclusion, exposure to chronic hypobaric hypoxia is mostly beneficial even during the COVID pandemic. Look, can you ask myself if I have a little more time? Can I ask myself if I have a little more time? Okay, but I'm almost finished. So, the campeón Richard Caparaz. This is the gold. He got the gold medal of the Olympics in Tokyo. He trains at 2,950 meters. And look at the distance between his first place in Tokyo at sea level. There he is. And that's the group of the rest. Why are they all together? They are all limited by their cells, by their mitochondria. This guy, fantastic. That's high altitude. This is from Bolivia, Hector Caribay. He went to Berlin and won the marathon. And look, the guys that are behind, again, they're far behind. Because this is a one focus. What's going on? This is another one. We have many, just 2 gold medals and 5,000 tournaments born in Oruro. Fantastic. And these are all they themselves.
2 días después de haber ganado una medalla dorada para el país en los 5.000 metros, esta vez como el fuerte viento de los Andes, tenaz y sorpresivo, el boliviano David Minavia Mamani, sorprendiendo a los competidores y ganándose.
That's right. Siguiente. Amazing, amazing. So,
El respeto de un continente, volvió a poner a Bolivia en la gloria del atletismo sudamericano, esta vez en los 10.000 metros planos. Una segunda medalla dorada pintada de rojo, amarillo y verde, por el esfuerzo del boliviano que se enfocó en mantener el ritmo.
And then Eliud Kipchoge, he breaks his own world record in the Berlin Marathon, trains at 2,000 meters. Just a few days ago. Is this impaired physical powers? So I think Barcroft has to rethink these concepts. And intellectuals like Octavio Paz from Mexico, Franz Tamayo. And we have a fantastic group of intellectuals at IELTS. Brains are working, neurons are working. And this is, I wanted to show you this because this is my research gate. And my ranking is at 91% of all that are on research gate. And this is from another friend, Luis Pacheco, from the Universidad Mayor de San Andrés. He has 94% above all those that are on research gate in this work. So people are, is this impaired mental powers at high altitude? Something has, it really was not right in the original expression. And of course, we wrote an article showing that most people can adapt to high altitude, can survive these diseases. And you know what happened? We published this, and then 18 sea-level high-altitude experts wrote to the chief editor asking that the article be withdrawn. And we ourselves contacted many people, friends, and asked them, what do you think? And they wrote all these letters of support for our work. Keep going. And there are many, more than 50 people added up and signed to support our work. But anyway, it got retried. So we had to write another article, a couple of articles, where we answered their observations. And believe me, all their observations were answered. Absolutely. For instance, increased mitochondrial efficiency, which shocked them. This conference will show. Okay, if life is so successful in the cities of La Paz and Alto, Cerro del Pasco, and the human being is in quest for instinctive survival, will leave the planet Earth and travel to space. Elon Musk is going to take us to Mars. Is it important to adapt? Absolutely. Astronauts have to adapt to low oxygen pressure, and they have to travel in environments like this high altitude environment, because the reason is faster preparation for extravehicular activity, oxygen economy, there's no oxygen out there, not as we have it here, and greater possibility of survival. So I created this word called biospace forming, which is life in the adaptation to life in the universe and adaptation, biospace forming. This is a very important concept because they talk about terraforming of Mars, but this is the biological part. And the biological part plays a fundamental role. By the way, I was asked by some people from the Navy to give a talk this afternoon on space, the concepts of chronic hypoxia in space, and you'll hear that. So this is, I'm finally here with the mountain rule. I always honor my father because all you see here was part of his abilities and creation. His beauty. And there's Natalia, that was our last picture together in a conference of Medicina de la Altura in Puno, Peru in 2015. And that's the Sahama mountain, and that's where we carried, thanks to his stimulus, the soccer game on the top of this mountain at 6,542 meters. And there they are. They play 20 minutes per side, tied 2-2. And it was perfect. Nobody passed out or died because we were told they would. So this is just to show you very briefly. And now I want to say that life at high altitude is beneficial. I want to affirm that the high altitude inhabitants are perfectly adapted to their life in their environment. They're capable of notable, outstanding mental powers and award-winning sport competitions. They're also capable of outranking sea-level competitors in their own environment, which hardly happens in an inverse way. High altitude hypertrophied is a remarkable experience for enhanced survival in the first step of biospace forward. Thank you very much. These are my great collaborators.